Going to the zoo is supposed to be a joyful experience, a place where families gather, children marvel at wildlife, and animals are presented as wonders of the natural world. But not every zoo lives up to that promise. In rural Pennsylvania, there was a roadside zoo that looked harmless from the outside. A quick stop, a local attraction, something meant to entertain. But behind the rusted bars and faded signs, a much darker reality existed. For four bears, Marcia, Fifi, Bruno, and Pocahontas, this place was not a zoo, it was a prison. They spent their entire lives confined to small rusty cages with concrete floors and metal bars. There was no shade to protect them from the summer heat, no pool to cool their bodies, no grass beneath their paws. At night, the only shelter they had was a broken doghouse that barely offered protection from the cold. Even their most basic instincts were denied. The bears were prevented from hibernating so they could remain on display year-round. When they weren't locked in their cages, they were dragged out to perform circus-like routine. Masks were strapped to their faces, ropes tightened around their necks. They were forced to entertain, not because they could, but because they had no choice. Over time, the damage became impossible to ignore. The bears paced endlessly, walking the same few steps again and again. They swayed. They shook. Classic signs of deep psychological distress. Their bodies suffered two-joint problems, poor health, exhaustion written into every movement. Eventually, their suffering was noticed. When animal rights advocates from PETA discovered the roadside zoo, they knew they were looking at an emergency. The bears were in critical condition, both mentally and physically. There was no time to waste. Plans were made quickly. One by one, Marcia, Fifi, Bruno, and Pocahontas were removed from the cages they had known their entire lives, loaded into transport crates, driven across the country on a long, exhausting 24-hour journey. Their destination was a wildlife sanctuary in Colorado, a place they had never known existed. And when the doors finally opened, for the first time in their lives, the bears stepped onto open ground. No bars, no chains, no come-ons, just space. But their story didn't end there, because they weren't the only bears waiting for freedom. The rescue of the 4 Pennsylvania bears was not an isolated victory. Across the country, others were fighting the same quiet battle, trying to end lives spent behind bars, disguised as entertainment. Years earlier, a tragic incident in Zanesville, Ohio, had forced lawmakers to confront the dangers of private wild animal ownership. The result was the Dangerous Wild Animal Act, a law designed not to punish animals but to protect them. That law would soon expose another troubling case. At a place called Stump Hill Farm, 9 bears were being held under the label of rescue. In reality, the facility was breeding exotic animals, something a true sanctuary would never do. The bears were unhealthy, some were malnourished, others were dangerously overweight. All of them had one thing in common: they had never known freedom. Authorities stepped in, and the bears were removed. For a short time, they stayed in a state-run holding facility. Then, something unexpected happened. 2 of the bears, Molly and Ursula, were pregnant. 9 bears became 13. The cubs' future depended on what happened next. If they remained in captivity, they would be taken from their mothers and raised behind bars, just like the generation before them. That's when help arrived again. PETA stepped in and arranged transport for all 13 bears to the same Colorado sanctuary where Marcia, Fifi, Bruno, and Pocahontas had begun their new lives. The journey was long, but the destination was worth it. At first, the bears were cautious. Years of confinement had taught them fear. The sanctuary staff understood this and gave them something they had never been offered before: choice. A safe enclosure they could retreat to, or open land they could explore when ready. Slowly, they chose more. They stepped onto grass, felt soil beneath their paws, discovered space that didn't end after a few steps. They explored at their own pace, guided by patience rather than force. Molly and Ursula were allowed to stay with their cubs. No separation, no cages, just family. Watching the bears roam freely, it became clear how resilient they were. Despite everything they had endured, they adapted, they healed, they reclaimed the lives that had been taken from them. Their story is a reminder of something simple and uncomfortable. Not every place that calls itself a zoo or a rescue truly serves animals, but when compassion replaces control, even the most damaged lives can begin again. For these bears, freedom didn't come early, but it finally came.